I'm continuing my series looking at the World Championship match between José Raúl Capablanca and Emmanuel Lasker, played in Havana 1921. And this time we're looking at game 12. This is an absolutely fascinating encounter, very, very complicated. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. Let's try and hit 100,000. And do consider supporting us as well via Patreon or PayPal. So here we go. Remember, up to this point, there have been, let me see, 3 wins for Capablanca and 8 draws. And this is game 12. So Capablanca very much in the driving seat. It's first to 6 wins, or the match will be stopped after 24 games. So we're in the second half of the match, or almost completed the first half of the match, and time running out for Lasker to hit back. So Lasker white here, it's a Spanish, and in fact the players have repeated an opening that they've played in a few games so far in this match. So it's a Berlin defence. Yeah. It's not just in the last 20 years that we've seen the Berlin. In fact, instead of taking on e4, which leads us to that endgame, or potentially, Capablanca played d6. So this is the so-called Steinitz variation of the Spanish. So it's more modest, but actually a very reasonable way to play. Really solid. Bishop e7. And, well, very popular at that time in the 1920s, but also earlier, going back, well, to the days of Steinitz, of course, in the end of the 19th century. So Rook e1. So white has a little bit more space in the centre than black, but black is pretty solid. Now here is where black really has to do something about the e5 pawn. I mean, this is actually a well-known trap. If black castles, then you can take here and take the pawn on e5. And bishop takes, well, I'm afraid this doesn't equalise for black. This just loses after this. It's a well-known trap. White eventually wins a piece here. There's a little bit more to it than that, but basically that's not a good idea. So in this position, after Rook e1, protecting this pawn, there is now a threat to take on c6 and take on e5. So at this point, black has to release the tension. E takes d4. So white has a space advantage. And, well, there were 2 previous games in the match where the games had gone like this, and bishop g5. I don't think bishop g5 is the best move, actually, because I think it allows black eventually to exchange pieces. The way that I've always played this with white is to play queen f3. That has a good reputation. So you can play knight f5 and potentially recapture here. And perhaps b3 and bishop b2 as well. I think it's a really nice position for white. Recently, Jordan van Foreest played h3 and bishop f4 against Rajabov in one of the Magnus online events. Also a very sound way for white to play. You want to get in e5, which splits these pawns so that black will be left after the exchange with doubled isolated c-pawns. So that's a good way for white to play. Anyway, that's all by the by, because in this position Lasker actually just dropped the bishop back to f1. Now, as I said, he's 3 down in this match, and I think he wanted to keep more pieces on the board, to keep more tension in the position, and that's why he dropped the bishop back. Didn't want to exchange it off. Rook e8 by Capablanca. Yeah, he's a little bit cramped. But with this typical curl up, the bishop going back to f8, then the rook starts to exert some pressure on the pawn on e4. So this is absolutely standard and very sound. f3 supports the e-pawn. And here Cap had just dropped the bishop back to f8, which is fine. A year later, London 1922, in the game over against Capablanca, Capa took on d4, gave himself a little bit more room, and won a very nice game against Over. Like this, broke out with d5. So yeah, interesting that he thought better of this move, bishop f8. And knight takes d4 is a very sound move. But bishop f8 played, also not bad. And now bishop g5. Well, you know, in this case, it's unlikely the bishop is going to go back. h6, bishop h4. And here's an interesting moment. How would you deal with this pin? So this is where things start to get interesting. How would you deal with that pin? Well, to me, if black wants to play very energetically, you could play g5 and put the knight on e5. And you might recall a wonderful game that Fabiano Caruana played against Radoslav Wojtaszek in Tata Steel this year, from a King's Indian, but where Caruana established a knight on e5 after playing pawn to g5, and then advanced this pawn and played the knight to h5 to f4. I mean, this is potentially quite double-edged. Of course, that f5 square is weaker, and it could weaken the king eventually, although there's a lot of firepower, a lot of pieces around the king. But that's quite a dynamic way to play. But Capablanca more restrained. He played g6 in order to put the bishop on g7. Keeps his options open. Pawns can't go backwards, but he still has the potential to play g5. And bishop g7. The bishop arrives here, protects the knight on f6. And again, a very interesting moment in the game where Lasker could play very calmly with white, but I think his intention here, when he played bishop f1, was to get a position with complications to keep all the pieces on the board. So a move like c3, just supporting the knight, well, here that could lead to a lot of exchanges, and I think that's what Capa wants. Capa, remember, he's 3 up in the match. He's not afraid to make a draw, and to exchange all these pieces, I think, would be very desirable. I don't think black has any difficulties there at all. So what did Lasker do here? Well, he started to stir up trouble. Knight b5, attacking the pawn on c7 with both those knights. Now here, if Capa just defends a bit passively, then c4, and you can see that white has pretty good control in the centre. And yeah, that knight supported here. So even if the bishop is pushed away by g5, then another knight will replace it, or well, maybe not actually. Could be that you recapture with the c pawn just to get a big space advantage. That's a nice position. Kind of position you see in King's Indian positions that have gone wrong for black. Nice clamp on the centre for white. So after knight b5, what did Capa do? Well, this is where things started to get pretty wild. g5. Now, if the bishop drops back, then the knight can be exchanged. More exchanges. The knight will come to g6. I don't think black has any difficulties there at all. That's not really a weakness on the king side. In fact, controls an important square. The king side is packed. I think, black's pieces are fine here. It's about equal, but, well, I mean, black could even be better if white isn't careful. But no, after g5, that wasn't Lasker's intention. Knight takes pawn on c7. Pawn takes bishop. Knight takes rook in the corner. Queen takes. And now knight c7. So white is winning 2 rooks. Capablanca has 3 minor pieces for 2 rooks. So it's a really unusual material balance. On a strict numerical basis, I think you could say that Lasker has won material with those 2 rooks. But actually, in practice, those 3 minor pieces are really difficult to deal with. But it's just an unclear position, and I'm sure that's basically what Lasker was looking for. So how does White play this position? Well, Lasker played Rook b1, protecting that pawn. I don't think that's the best move. I think if White is going to play like this, then one should play f4, covering the e5 square. And after bishop takes, here, don't be afraid to give up an exchange. And this is, I think this is quite instructive actually. When I was looking at this, I realised that let's just expel that rook. If black takes that, now white is okay. Because suddenly that queen is looking at the king side. That pawn doesn't look great without a dark squared bishop. The minor pieces somehow don't look great in this position. I rather like white there. But what's interesting is if you keep the dark squared bishop, then black is fine. Because that bishop protects so many key squares, well, all down that diagonal. Again, don't take that rook, but just keep that bishop and then bring the knight in. You can still pack the king side, but that bishop is such a strong piece. It really holds black's position together. Nevertheless, I still think that f4 should be played. I think it does give white some chances, at least of creating an attack if black goes wrong, for example. I don't think that objectively white has the advantage. I'm certainly not saying that. But the move that Lasker played, Rook b1, I think is really risky. But Kappa did not exploit it. I think Kappa was playing very much on, well, as Kasparov said in his commentary, in his book, My Great Predecessors, he said Kappa plays on general grounds. Sometimes he doesn't look at specifics. And here Kappa played bishop e6. But any King's Indian or Benoni player would love this position with black. You'd want to go bishop e5 and start attacking white's king on the dark squares, and followed up with queen f6, stopping f4, and then you swing your knight in, and suddenly it's on h5, and you're threatening to bring the knight into g3. This is a dream attacking the position. Not to mention this pawn potentially coming to h3 to break up the pawns here. The rooks don't have open files. They don't have any great perspective, basically. This is a wonderful attacking position for black. And, well, to my eyes, very natural moves for black. But maybe those moves weren't so natural in 1921, not for Capablanca, who was this very orthodox player. And he just went bishop e6, or maybe it's because of the match situation, and he was looking to just hold the position. He didn't think about anything more than holding the position. He wasn't looking to attack. And here, c3, bishop takes a2, and the bishop came back. Once again, after c3, I still think bishop e5 is a very strong move with exactly the same idea. Queen f6 and knight g7 to h5. But no, bishop takes a2. And, well, here's an interesting thought. Kappa played here a6. Oops, excuse me. Kappa played a6. But knight f6, also very interesting idea. Just swing the knight over And again, bishop e5, attacking on the dart squares, and then queen c7. Feels so natural. But no, a6. And now h5 from Capablanca. You could still play knight e5 here. But h5 and f4. So finally Lasker gets a hold of those dart squares. Really important. Black is fine here, but I think it was a missed opportunity for Capablanca. And after these exchanges, basically the position calms down a bit. Bishop a6, Lasker recovers a pawn, because of course if pawn takes, then rook takes knight. d5 holds the knight in the middle. Bishop comes back, bishop takes pawn on h5. And here the players agreed to a draw. And I think the position is about equal. So it's still this strange balance of pieces. 3 minor pieces against 2 rooks. But there's not too much in the position now. I mean, the game could end like this. Check. Knight f2, hitting the rook. The rook comes up. Well, they could repeat the position. I don't think either side is in any great danger here. But anyway, that's the position where they agreed a draw. So, an intriguing little game. But I was just fascinated by the fact that Kappa declined to go in for this attacking continuation by putting the bishop on e5, which to my eyes feels so natural. Anyway, I will continue with my look at the match. So, and certainly one more video to come. Thanks for watching.